Hey guys. Okay, so we're back again talking about column writing today. Oh, it doesn't like to. There we go. Okay. Um, so a column is a specific type of journalistic piece that you will see in most news publications. It may not be published every day, but you might see them published like once a week. It just kind of depends on the publication. For instance, if you went to the New York Times website, you could find like columns that are probably published every single day and maybe multiple times a day. But like in the Topeka Capital Journal, probably you have a column that's published like once a week. Usually we classify these as op-ed pieces or which is called opinion pieces because they were originally published opposite of the editorial page in the newspaper. So it just somehow got shortened to op-ed. And op-ed pieces are also inclusive of other opinion type pieces. So a column today, as we think about it, is a piece of writing that is what we call an opinion piece, but it is a strong and it's informed and it represents the opinion of the writer on some kind of issue that the target audience would care about. So characteristics of a column, usually it's pretty short, between 750 to 800 words. It should have a clearly defined point. It should have a clearly defined point of view, like what is your stance on this, thing that you're talking about. Should represent clarity of thinking. You want a clear argument for your point of view, and it should contain the strong, distinctive voice of the writer. So for those of you who are like really into the creative writing, this column assignment is for you. You can go crazy on the opinions, which is absolutely fine as long as you put it into this cohesive, argument for why your opinion on this issue should matter. So some things to ask about when you're writing a column is like, what is your clear point? What thing do you want to talk about and what's your point, right? And who's going to care, right? We want to write for an audience that is going to want to read the column. So for instance, if you're writing for the Topeka Capital Journal, you want to write for something in Topeka that people in Topeka are going to care about. You're not going to write for something that people in Nebraska would care about, right? So again, you have to think about this and think like, who's going to care? Now, for our column assignment in this class, you don't necessarily need to think too much about a particular audience because we're not writing for a specific publication. So I'll let you kind of be very wide on your subject matter, depending what you want to pick, as long as you have a clear point. But if you're working for a newspaper or news organization, you're always going to be asked like, who's going to care? And then is there any substance to my argument? Like, do I have like the facts and the figures to back up my opinion? Do I have the evidence for it? Are there other people that are experts who are giving me the same opinion? Like what are those? And if you don't have any substance to your argument, you probably shouldn't write about it. Okay, so one thing to think about is you have to pick a topic. Every column has to have a chosen topic. We're not going to talk about, for instance, gun control in the United States. That's way too wide, right? There's so much. But what you could do is narrow it down to something like gun control in American high schools, right? So that's pretty narrow. And yes, it's still quite wide. I mean, you could narrow it down even further and be like gun control in high schools in Topeka, Kansas, right? And that might be even better because if you're writing for the Capital Journal, people probably would care about that. Okay. So you want to make sure your topic isn't too huge. It needs to be clearly defined. It needs to be concise. It needs to be something that you can easily like talk about. And needs to be something that they'll get immediately, like, okay, this is what you're talking about. So you want to state it in the very first paragraph, right? The theme is kind of your big overarching idea for the column, like what's your point in writing about the chosen topic. So are you writing about gun control in Topeka high schools because there was like a mass shooting at a Topeka high school, or there was a mass shooting at another high school somewhere in the nation and you want to talk about it, like, okay, that could be us, right? So you got to think about like, what is the point, right? And the theme could also appear like early in the piece, like you could set the stage with it, and then you can also like, come in later and turn it into a deeper level of argument. I would say probably for what you're doing, don't worry about that. Just like get your theme kind of in the first paragraph. Okay, so research is important for columns, right? Um, Opinion pieces do allow writers to include their own voice and express an opinion. And I do want to hear your voice come through this piece, and I want to, hear your opinions on things. But to be successful, you have to have the research to go with it, right? So this means using facts, quotations, citations, or data from sources and personal observation. So research is like different types, right? And we'll kind of go through the types of research that you can include. It doesn't all have to be just immediately put out of your mind that English paper where you had to have the long works cited page. Like that is not what this is. Okay. So yes, there will be some of those sources, but most columns are really trying to include research because you want the reader to kind of really connect with the column, right? So here are some different types of research you can include. So you could do field research, like you actually went to the scene. You did interviews with the principal at the high school. You like talked to police at the, Topeka Police Department. You talked to firefighters. You actually interviewed people about this column, right? So here's, I guess, let's just say, here's another example that doesn't involve gun violence. Um, how about a column over why it's important for prisoners to have access to college education in Kansas? I mean, if you were doing something like that, yes, you can do some research and you can go to the library, and do some research and find, you know, um, research on job placement, for convicted felons and things like that, of course. But you could also just talk to people who like made it out of the system and got jobs, talk to people who are hiring people, talk to your teachers, right? And that could be perfectly fine for your column. Like, because those kinds of interviews are also okay. Normally, if you're doing like everything perfectly, right, you want to have a great mix of all of it. You want to have the firsthand observations because you interviewed and you talked to the people who were there, but you also want to have some of the academic, the document sources. But columns don't tend to rely on those academic sources as heavily. And you're not writing a research paper, okay? So just make sure you keep that in mind. This is not a research paper. This is like an opinion piece where you want to formulate a great argument with evidence. Okay, so your lead, right? The first line of the column is going to be the most important thing you will write. It's the hook that should grab the reader's attention. This does not have to be a hard news lead the way we've been talking about all semester long. You can do a hard news lead, kind of like the who, what, when, where, why, and how, if you really want to. That is totally fine too. But you can also make it more anecdotal, right? Tell a bit of a story. Give a surprising fact and say, did you know that 60% of high school students, blah, 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 right? It could be something like this. You could use a metaphor. You could put out a mystery or even a counterintuitive observation, just something to hook them in. So what I would suggest when you're in your column assignment is that you might just jot down some ideas for your lead. And then I would write the column and I would come back and then write the lead last and try to find the thing that like fits your column and will hook people in. Okay. Because you want the lead to lay the foundation for the argument. Okay. So we're not going to like play bait and switch. You want the lead to obviously lead into your opinion on the topic. Every good column will also need a strong ending, right? So you could echo or answer the introduction. You want to foreshadow your final opinion, your final statement throughout the piece, right? So it shouldn't just come out of nowhere and people are like, what? I thought they were saying this, and now suddenly they're saying that. It should also be, your last paragraph should be the last and maybe most memorable detail of the column. And sometimes it will contain like this final realization, or it could call the reader to action, like, so something like this. Okay, so there are two basic types of endings. Okay, the first is what we call an open ending. This will suggest rather than state a conclusion. So you're gonna like kind of suggest the reader kind of come to their own conclusion on it, right? But you're kind of leading them there, giving them the breadcrumbs, but you're not going to be like, this is the final statement. But a closed ending is usually going to just resolve the whole point of the piece, and this is the most commonly used type. Okay, so this is the thing where if you want to do, you want to make sure you do a good job. Probably, unless you're really, really good at what you're doing, I would pick the closed ending. Just resolve it and be like, this is what it is. Okay. I think the first one is great, but at the same time, there's a lot of things you're going to be practicing, so I wouldn't like freak out about it. Having a strong voice is critical to the success of your column. Oh my gosh, people need to know you as the writer, right? You as the journalist. So let your voice come through. In this assignment, you absolutely can do that. But keep it conversational, because we want to put the reader, like as they're reading your column, they want to be able to imagine sitting down with you, right? So sitting down next to you and hearing your conversation, they want to be able to like, come away with this image of like, oh, I read this, opinion piece, and it was like me talking to you. Okay. So that means no jargon, no like super, high level words. Like don't go over the reader's head. Cause remember, we're at an 8th grade level, right? 8th grade reading level is the average in America, I think, still. um, the range of the voice in the columns can vary. So you could go very humorous, you could go very serious. Like, I mean, if you're talking about something like gun violence, probably serious is important. If you're talking about something like how ironic it is that the Army used John Majors for their be all you can be campaign, and yet he just got arrested for a bunch of bad stuff as of yesterday, which is March 26th, 2023, in case you watch this later. um that might be more humorous, right? You might be like, wow, they really picked a winner there. So it just kind of, it depends, right? But you want it to fit the piece, right? And a good thing to do is to always read your column out loud to yourself, right? Give yourself a sense of how it's going to sound when you actually, it's out there and people are reading it. Okay, always check your column for these final things before you actually submit it. Clarity, does it make sense? And a good check is to ask somebody to read it and say, like, do you get what I'm trying to say here all the way through? Coherence, unity throughout, like, does everything flow from the first paragraph to the second to the third? Like, it's flowing all the way through, right? And so I'm not surprised by the ending because I knew that you were setting me up for it all the way through, this kind of thing. Simplicity, remember, it's conversation, but an opinionated one. So don't feel like you're not writing a research paper, okay? This is just more simple than that. Voice and tone, most should be conversational, but in an instance, like let's say you're writing something about how important it is to vote, you might be more authoritative, right? In that instance, like this is what you should do because you're a citizen. But most of what you're probably going to write is going to be very conversational. Direct quotes and paraphrases for accuracy. So whatever sources you interview for this, yes, you should definitely double check that those are correct and that your sources are properly, like the names are properly spelled and everything. And then the consistency of your opinion throughout the column. I shouldn't just read your opinion in the first paragraph and the last paragraph. I should know, like, through the whole column what your opinion is. Okay. So keep that in mind. Okay. So examples of columns. So this is an example lead that Roy Peter Clark, who wrote the book, you guys are reading, did for ESPN. And if you look at the lead, like what is actually telling you about the column? So University of Florida head football coach Urban Meyer has proved himself to be a bully and a hypocrite. His threats against an Orlando Sentinel reporter, Jeremy Fowler, on Wednesday confirmed the coach's emotional instability, a sign that he may have been allowed to return way too early from his medical leave of absence. So if we look at this, we can really see like right away what his opinion is. There is no doubt that Roy Peter Clark does not like the football coach Urban Meyer, right? I mean, he's basically saying he's not fit to do the job, right? And then what is the, like, if we look at the overall theme here is like people in positions of power being allowed to get away with bad behavior towards like journalists. right? Like, and so he's picking the very specific incident of Urban Meyer, and what he did to the reporter Jeremy Fowler. This actually, this column did really, really, really well. Like when it was published by ESPN, and like tons of people were reading it and talking about it, because people like definitely, had strong opinions on this, and I think that that is a great example of a lead that really throws you out there, like right away what it is that he believes about this incident, right? Right away what his opinion is about Urban Meyer and the behavior. So this is what we want. I want this. I want this like serious opinion in my face. Um, Roy Peter Clark wrote an awesome article for the Poynter Institute about the characteristics of what he calls kick-ass columns. So I'm going to go through a few of these because I think they're just great tips on how to make your column really, really good. So you want the lead to be like a laser blast, right? That's going to capture the tone and the message of the piece. Just like we read in the ESPN one, you want it to be right away, no doubt in your mind, like what's going on. So here's an example, actually an older example by John Justin Smith, older as in like, I think it was published in the 30s or something, of the Chicago Daily News. And it sparked like a huge uprising of people against the slumlords in Chicago. And they actually did protests and stuff. And so he wrote, in Chicago in the 20th century, the 10 Lee kids had bread for lunch. Bread and what? Bread and nothing, just bread. That's right, just bread. There's nothing else, said one of the kids. I mean, something like this leaves you no doubt what he's about to talk about, right? He's talking about poverty. He's talking about 10 children who can't afford to eat anything else. And of course, his whole column went into this whole, horrible thing about how people were keeping families in poverty by the way that they like maintained their buildings, apartment buildings and stuff. So, I mean, that's what you want. You want something that really gets right to the story. Okay, so a kick-ass column will also have a crucial direction. So it should include a set of language that like will up the ante, progressively, right? So here's an example by Sally Jenkins that was published in the Washington Post. It won an award. And look at the images that the words are going to bring to your mind that she wrote in the lead. So the 32-year-old swimmer is so landlocked in juvenility that he pulled an all-nighter with guys young enough to call him uncle. His story to NBC's Billy, What Are You Wearing? Bush had the quality of a kid exaggerating the size of a fish. And notice how he was the hero of every detail. That was always the most dubious and plausible part. Juvenility, a kid exaggerating the size of a fish, hero of every detail. I mean, it just like sounds like a child, right? Like sounds like what a little 12-year-old might do. So again, this lead pulls you into this like column, and already what she thinks about Ryan Lochte. You already know, that she's not happy with his behavior. So a column must also include a body of evidence that supports your opinion, your line of attack, right? So this can come into two different forms, like we've talked about: facts from responsible sources, like so you can interview people and ask them, or an abbreviated narrative that invites readers to look at what happened and draw judgments. So in the column by Sally Jenkins, here's what she writes that kind of support the telling. You can see the bathroom door appear to burst out of its wooden frame on the security video. And then later on, in his shifting public accounts, Lochte never mentioned that busted up bathroom. Now put yourself in the shoes of the overrun and pride-stung local police when they saw that video of the Americans returning to the athletes' village a little after 6 a.m., so cheerfully buzzed, with Lochte blithely twirling his credential on a chain, and all of them still in possession of their cell phones and watches. So, she's bringing in the facts of the story. So you can see that there's a video, right? She's talking about the video. She's talking about what they did on the video that the police saw when they, were just acting like it was no big deal. And they all had their cell phones, so they couldn't have said, there was no excuse for what they did. Roy Peter Clark also says a kick-ass column also has movement up and down the ladder of language, from concrete and specific to the abstract and the general. So here's here's example by John Updike where he wrote a column about the creation of Pop Top beer. And it quickly moves from the abstract into the specific. So this is an era of gratuitous inventions. That's very abstract, right? Like, what does that mean? Gratuitous inventions. Like, it's just out there, right? Like, basically inventions that like make us feel good. And negative improvements. So again, very much out there. Like, what is a negative improvement? Everything could be, called a negative improvement. Now we're going to get down specific. Consider the beer can, right? So he gives you these big abstract, like overarching, ideas, and then he brings you down into this very specific example of a beer can. Okay. And that's something that good columns will do. They'll move back and forth between the big abstract down to the specific. So in Sally Jenkins' column that we've been talking about, here's kind of where she puts her abstractions in. She puts them in when it comes to character adjectives. So is there anything worse in any country, writes Jenkins, than a bunch of entitled is very abstract, young drunks who break the furniture and pee on a wall? That is your concrete example, right? So entitled, and then they're peeing on the wall, right? So abstract to very specific examples. There is no translator need for that one. No cultural norm that excuses it. So we're back to the idea of cultural norms, which is this big abstract thought, right? And so again, she's very much calling out the specific example to support like this bad behavior, which is a big abstract thought. A kick-ass column will give the reader gold coins or rewards placed strategically throughout the piece. So I know you have read about gold coins at this point. I don't think you're finished reading about them yet because you're still going through the book. But a gold coin, which was defined by Don Fry, is an element in the story that rewards the reader's attention, right? So it can be a startling fact, it could be a telling anecdote or a turn of phrase. And you want to put them throughout the column because it reminds readers of why they started reading and helps them to get all the way through the end. So in Sally Jenkins' column, the gold coins are these snippets. He must have thought Ryan Lochte's pee was gold dust. This is a guy who apparently lied to his own mother. The main quality Lochte has shown in all of this is obliviousness. First, he tweeted about his hair, which he had dyed a silvery white before the games. So, I mean, these are like these like little like sentences that you're just like, oh, okay. Especially the one, this is a guy who lied to his own mother. Like, I mean, it's funny, right? And it keeps you involved in the column. It keeps you going. Okay, so a kick-ass column will often give the kicker what sometimes people call the conclusion as a parting shot, right? So this is her kicker. Then on Thursday morning, even as Conger and Vince were in a police station and authorities were mulling potential charges, he posted an idiotic video of himself. It was a distortion lens, cartoonish video of him babbling at his friend and fellow American swimmer Elizabeth Beasel. Lochte eventually deleted it, which was too bad because it was a perfect portrait of a half-wit. Lochte's done as a public figure, of course, which is probably the most effective form of justice for someone who apparently so craves attention. Oblivion is what he deserves. So, I mean, she really like lays it out there, like from the lead to the end. I mean, she does not like this guy and she does not like his behavior. And she's like telling you, I look down on this. So I think that's like, that's funny. But this is a good example of how strong you can write in a good column if you do it well, right? If you have the like facts to back it up. So like, she talks about the video, for instance, that he took of himself and that he deleted. She gives you the facts of what happened, she walks you through it, and then she gives you very strong opinions about how stupid he was. So oops, I guess that's the end of that. I did post though an example column for you guys on the Brightspace page, so you should see it. I think it's at the bottom on the week's content, and it should say like example of a column. It is not as opinionated. It's more factual and lets the sources do the opinion writing. If that's what you're more comfortable with, I don't mind if you go kind of that route and let the sources give you the opinions. But if you want to get really creative with it and you want to really like give the opinions like very strongly, kind of like what Sally Jenkins did, I am totally fine with that. Okay. All right, guys, thank you so much. And I will talk to you later. Have a great rest of your day.